There is a quiet ache that lives inside every human heart. The fear that after they are gone, their story will be told wrong, that someone will remember them not as they were, but as a distorted echo of someone else's perception. It's not the fear of being forgotten. It's deeper than that. It sits the fear of being misunderstood, of being remembered for the wrong reasons, of leaving behind an image that doesn't belong to the truth of who they were. This fear hides behind the smile of those who over-explain. It whispers in the mind of those who can't let go of a last impression. And in its silence, it asks a haunting question. Who decides who we truly were, once we are no longer here to explain? There is a strange loneliness that comes from being seen, but not understood. From having someone look directly at you, yet only glimpse a version of who they think you are. Most people carry this quietly. They smile, nod, and pretend it doesn't matter. But deep inside, there's a soft ache, the feeling that their real self is hidden behind a fogged mirror. Humans are born with an unspoken hunger to be seen truly. Not for what they've done, not for what others project onto them, but for the small, trembling truth beneath it all. The person they are when no one sits, watching. When that truth is overlooked, when someone rewrites their intentions, it feels like being erased while still standing in the room. To be misremembered, even in small ways, can feel like a theft of identity. Someone laughs at a story, but retells it differently. Someone recalls a mistake, but forgets the reason behind it. And suddenly, a version of you exists that you don't recognize. That version walks around in other people's memories, shaped by their emotions, not yours. You want to correct it, but how do you fight what lives inside another mind? Psychologists call this tension perceived identity distortion, the gap between how we see ourselves and how others define us. For many, this gap becomes a quiet form of suffering. It makes them over-explain, overthink, or replay conversations long after they ended, trying to reshape how they were seen. Yet the irony is that everyone is doing this, each person protecting the fragile idea of themselves, inside the unpredictable theater of perception. Everyone wants to be known for who they are, not the story told about them. But in the end, human connection is never perfect clarity. It sits a series of reflections, some accurate, some warped, and within those distortions, we learn that maybe no one can ever be fully seen, only felt in fragments. The fear of being remembered incorrectly doesn't appear out of nowhere. It begins in small, almost invisible moments. The first time a child tries to explain themselves, and no one believes them. The first time they tell the truth, but someone laughs or twists their words. In that moment, something delicate breaks. A quiet realization forms. My version of the story doesn't matter. And from then on, a seed of self-doubt is planted. One that grows silently with every misunderstanding that follows. Human memory of injustice begins young. A teacher blames the wrong student. A parent assumes the worst. A friend tells others a story that isn't quite true. Each time, the heart records the pain of misrepresentation. It doesn't just hurt, it confuses. Because in those moments, reality itself feels unstable. If others can reshape what happened, then what is the truth? Who decides what's real? This uncertainty builds a lifelong vigilance. People learn to explain themselves preemptively, to defend their intentions before being accused. They apologize for things they didn't do, and correct stories no one asked them to. It becomes a subtle form of self-protection, a way to guard the fragile boundary between who they are and how they are remembered. Psychologists often trace this pattern to experiences of emotional invalidation. When a person's inner world is consistently dismissed, the mind develops a hypersensitivity to being misunderstood. It learns that perception equals safety, that being seen accurately is not just desirable, but necessary for survival. By adulthood, this fear matures into something quiet and complicated. It hides behind politeness, behind the careful crafting of reputation. It whispers when someone posts an old photo or tells a story that doesn't match one lesser memory. And while others move on easily, the person who fears misremembering replays it for days, haunted by the image they cannot control. At its root, this isn't vanity. It serves a longing for coherence, to exist in the world as one, not fragmented versions scattered across memories, to be remembered as whole, as true, as real. Memory feels sacred, like a vault of truth preserved in the mind. But science tells a softer, more fragile story. Memories are not recordings. They are reconstructions. Each time someone recalls a moment, their brain rebuilds it from scattered fragments, emotions, images, words. And in the process, something always changes. Neuroscientists call this reconsolidation. Every recollection rewrites the past, slightly bending it toward what we believe happened, not necessarily what did. In that sense, every memory is a story told by the brain to make sense of emotional chaos. And just like any storyteller, the mind edits, exaggerates, forgets, and fills in gaps. When someone remembers us, they're not recalling a perfect version of who we were. They sit remembering a feeling, the way we made them feel, the tone of our voice, the emotional imprint left behind, the details, what we said, how we looked, what truly happened, blur and reshape around that emotion. This means every person we meet carries a different version of us, each built on their own emotional context. To one, we are kind. To another, cold. To someone else, unforgettable. None of these are lies. They sit emotional truths, reflections filtered through different hearts. Psychology calls this empathic distortion, the phenomenon where memory is influenced, not by fact, but by feeling. A moment shared in sadness will be remembered differently than one shared in joy, even if the event was the same. So when someone misremembers us, it isn't always betrayal. It sits biology. Their brain simply wrote the story from where they stood. And yet, knowing this doesn't erase the ache. Because to the one who fears being misremembered, logic cannot comfort emotion. It's still painful to know that truth itself shifts in the fragile theater of memory, that even love can distort us, and that no one, not even those closest, can hold a perfectly accurate version of who we were. Perhaps that sits the hidden tragedy of memory. It keeps us alive in others, but never quite as ourselves. Inside every person who fears being remembered incorrectly, there is a quiet war between two opposing needs. The need to be authentic, and the need to be understood. Authenticity asks for freedom, to speak, to act, to live without editing oneself. But understanding demands translation, to mold truth into something others can accept. And in between these two lies exhaustion, the emotional fatigue of constantly adjusting one's truth just to avoid being misread. Many people learn to live in this space of compromise. They soften their edges. They hide parts of themselves that don't fit into others' stories. They laugh at jokes that wound them, stay silent when they want to correct a misconception, and call it keeping the peace. But deep down, something inside feels quietly betrayed. It sits the awareness that every filtered word creates another false memory in someone else's mind. Every time truth is edited, another version of them begins to exist, one step further from who they really are. This is why people often replay conversations in their heads, long after they ended. They are not obsessed with the past. They're trying to rewrite perception. They want to go back and clarify, to be seen more accurately, to undo the misunderstanding before it hardens into memory. Psychologists describe this as cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of knowing that the image others hold does not match the reality within. It's a form of self-alienation. One begins to feel like an actor in their own life, performing for an audience that never truly sees the script. And yet, the cruel paradox is that the more one tries to control how they sip scene, the more distorted they become. Authenticity fades into performance. Truth becomes presentation. And somewhere in the process, the real self, tender, unguarded, honest, starts to disappear behind the versions built to protect it. This is the silent conflict of being human, to want to be known completely, while fearing that even the attempt to explain might only create another misunderstanding. There comes a moment, quiet, unannounced, when a person realizes that no matter how carefully they live, their story will never fully belong to them. It's a strange freedom disguised as loss. At first, it feels unfair. The idea that someone else might carry a version of you that you cannot edit or erase. You want to reach into their mind, to straighten the words, to adjust the tone, to make sure they remember the truth. But then comes the realization, truth isn't set, something that can be owned. It moves, reshapes, and breathes differently in every heart that holds it. The stories people tell about us are not our responsibility. They are reflections, fragments seen through the mist of their own emotions, their own limitations, their own pain. And maybe that sip's not distortion at all, but simply the human way of perceiving. Psychologists call this the narrative fallacy, our tendency to believe we control how our life will be told. But the truth is, no one can. Once a moment leaves your hands, it becomes something else entirely. A story shaped by another sip's memory, softened or sharpened by time. At first, this realization hurts. It feels like letting go of ownership over yourself. But slowly, it begins to feel lighter. Because if no one can hold your story perfectly, then no one can destroy it either. Your essence becomes scattered, not in one definitive version, but in 1,000 imperfect echoes, each one holding a small truth, each one incomplete but still alive. Freedom begins when you stop fighting those echoes, when you understand that you are not the sum of how others remember you. You are the quiet, breathing truth beneath all versions, the part that doesn't need to be seen to exist. And in that understanding, the fear begins to soften, because the story no longer needs protection. It only needs to be lived. Healing begins the moment one stops trying to fix perception. It starts in silence, in the gentle acceptance that being misunderstood is not a flaw to correct, but a part of being human. For the first time, the person who once explained too much learns the peace of saying nothing. They realize that truth doesn't vanish when others fail to see it. It lives quietly inside, untouched by rumor, untouched by memory. This realization doesn't erase pain instantly. It simply makes it softer, easier to hold. Because the more one accepts imperfection in others' understanding, the more compassion grows, not only for others, but for oneself. Psychologists call this process cognitive reappraisal, the act of reinterpreting emotional events in a way that reduces their sting. Instead of fighting the fear of misrepresentation, one begins to see it as inevitable, a reflection of how vast, how layered, and how beautifully complex the human mind truly is. And from that understanding grows empathy, the same empathy that once begged, "Please remember me correctly," now whispers, "It's okay if you don't sit." Acceptance is not indifference, it sits clear. It sits the quiet recognition that people can only see what their own consciousness allows. Some will remember your tenderness as weakness. Some will mistake your silence for distance. Some will never see you at all. But that's not a failure. It's the limit of perception. In the space of this acceptance, life becomes lighter. The need to defend the past fades. Conversations no longer echo as guilt or regret. you begin to realize that your story is not a single thread to be kept intact, but a tapestry, woven, tangled, and unfinished, held together not by control, but by continuity. And perhaps the most healing thought of all is this: even if you are remembered incorrectly, you are still remembered. You left a mark deep enough to be carried, even if imperfectly. And that means, in some form, you were seen. One day, the world will move on. Your voice will fade from familiar ears. Your face will blur in the minds that once loved you. Even the stories told about you will begin to change, smoothed by nostalgia, reshaped by emotion, edited by the passing of time. And yet, something of you will remain, not in the details, not in the accuracy of recollection, but in the feeling you left behind. You might not be remembered for the right words or the right reasons, but someone, somewhere, will remember the calm in your presence, the warmth in your tone, the way you made them feel less alone, even if they no longer recall why. That is the quiet afterlife of every human being, to exist in emotional memory, not factual memory, to live on, not through precision, but through resonance. Maybe that's how it was always meant to be. Because if every memory were perfect, we would never evolve. If every version of us were preserved exactly, there would be no space for others to grow from their own interpretation. Philosophers have long said that truth is not a destination. It's a living current. It flows, it shifts, it merges with every consciousness it touches. In that sense, being remembered incorrectly is not a distortion, it's continuation. You are not a photograph to be kept intact. You are a ripple, moving quietly through time, changing form, becoming part of countless unseen stories. And maybe, one day, someone who never met you will feel an emotion you once inspired in another and carry it forward unknowingly. A soft chain of invisible remembrance. This is what remains. After the fear dissolves, a quiet grace, the understanding that nothing real is ever lost. Even when names are forgotten, the essence of kindness, sincerity, and love continues to echo, not as memory, but as a presence. And in that echo, you are never misremembered, never forgotten. You are simply transformed into something infinite, something beyond the need to be remembered at all.